Hi, my name is Praneesh. Welcome to my channel Everyday Space. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the docking of the Soyuz with the International Space Station, or ISS. Last week, we looked at the journey that Soyuz takes to get to orbit. So if you have not subscribed yet, please subscribe and let's get started. So the Soyuz is now at an altitude of 220 kilometers above Earth. It now has to catch up to the International Space Station's orbit, which is roughly 420 kilometers above Earth. In the 5 to 6 hour journey, let's see what it does in step to step. So the astronauts just went through the last phase of the launch sequence, which is engine cutoff. The Soyuz is now separated from the rocket, and they can now see beautiful views of Earth through their small windows. The red orbit is Soyuz's insertion orbit. The green is the ISS orbit, or International Space Station's orbit. So the ISS orbits Earth every 90 minutes, and the gaps you see is because of Earth rotating. It is constant, and it orbits on an orbital plane. If you project this on a 2D map, you get pairs of intersecting curves as the ISS orbits. So Mission Control in Moscow and Houston plan out the International Space Station's trajectory and to see where and when the Soyuz is going to dock with the International Space Station. So they can now figure out where and exactly when it's gonna dock. So the quickest way to get to the International Space Station is when you launch when it is directly above Baikonur. This makes it 5 to 6 hours other than the traditional 2-day long journey. Two-day long journey once happened on Expedition 39 when the 3 astronauts had to go through a 2-day long docking sequence when one of the altitude sensor failed. This is the journey it's going to take to catch up to the International Space Station. Like I said before, the Soyuz is traveling at an orbit of around 220 kilometers and has to catch up to the station's altitude of 420 kilometers. Let's see exactly how it does this. So, the insertion, orbit, and burns cannot be predicted beforehand because it can change due to the launch sequence. So, the first burn that we get is called the whole moon transfer, named after a German scientist. It consists of 2 burns. The first burn is used to get to the phasing orbit, which is around 320 kilometers above ground. The second burn is to stay in that phasing orbit to speed it up. So it is now in its phasing orbit, about 320 kilometers above Earth. The point of the phasing orbit is to decrease the phasing angle, or distance, between the 2 objects. It is basically trying to catch up to the International Space Station. So astronauts now have to do some safety checks and preparations before the docking. One of these preparations is the extension of the docking probe on the front of the spacecraft, which will be needed later when they're going to dock. So they now have to do some tasks before they can rest for a while. Now spacecraft is going to make 5 death orbits, or orbits where they cannot communicate to the ground. So they now have some downtime and can do whatever they want. They can move between the Soyuz's compartments to stretch out a bit. The Soyuz has 3 compartments: the orbital module, the descent module, and the instrument compartment. The orbital module houses all of the food and water the astronauts will need. The instrument compartment has stuff for life support like propellant and oxygen for the astronauts. They're not allowed to go into the instrument compartment, but they are allowed to go into the orbital module. So mission controls are still trying to map out how it's going to dock. Because of this, the astronauts extend a periscope and so they can view out of the spacecraft. So they now have to return to their seats. Transfer is called a bi-elliptical transfer. It consists of 3 burns. The first 2 burns are used to get to the station's orbit, and the third burn is to speed it up so it can also stay in that orbit. So, if the phasing orbit is too high or too low, it can use different docking ports to dock with the International Space Station on different sides. So what happens if it goes too fast and it crashes into the ISS as it was not able to brake? This can result in a collision and it could be disastrous. So because of this, while it does the bi-elliptical transfer, it does a side burn, putting it on a different orbital plane, so a collision between both of these vehicles is impossible. So as this is happening, they're still doing checks and putting up systems to prepare for the docking. The astronauts now turn on the onboard computer docking guidance. It is called CURS. So it does a braking burn to slow down its velocity so it can dock, and then immediately turns back to face the International Space Station in order to dock. So their workload has increased. They have to run up some systems and do some final checks before they can dock with the International Space Station. They're now mapping out how it's going to dock and if there is adequate lighting and if they can relay back information when it's going to dock. So as I said before, they're now running systems and checking before they can dock. The commander also takes control of the manned docking just in case if something fails. They have been training for this until days before launch. So now, as it makes its final approach, the Curse is supposed to be automated, and it is only used if Curse goes wrong. Other than that, the main control systems will never be used. So it might have to redock to another docking port on the International Space Station because other supply vessels might be coming in. This time they need to use manned controls for the docking. So at 150 meters, it will point its Curse antenna near another Curse antenna on the International Space Station. When it's 150 kilometers, it will then turn to point the docking port. And then it will keep its 150 meter distance, and then it will align itself with the docking port. When everything is good, they will issue a command to use its thrusters to go to the International Space Station. While it's doing this, the astronauts can see what is happening to the Curse antenna on their main display. It will show the distance from the International Space Station and the speed it's going to go, so they can verify it. So once the docking probe touches with the International Space Station, it is called contact, and then pulls it in to ensure it is secure. Do some checks before making sure that there's no gap between them. This will take about an hour. And then when they're ready, they will knock on the door and then open it as a custom. So as I said, they will knock on the door and then they will knock back, and then they can open the hatch and now meet each other. This is going to be their home for 6 months. Thanks for watching. If you like more of my videos, as I said before, please subscribe and like this video. My next video, I'm going to be covering the undocking and re-entry and landing of the Soyuz rocket. So see you next time.